Anyway, let's get started. We left off with chapter 18. We're going to start chapter 18 today. And as you recall, we have been quite in the middle of the rebellion of Absalom. And we had a situation we discussed. We had two different pieces of advice that were given to Absalom. One was given by Achitophel, who indeed gave the better advice. But Hushai, who was actually a spy for David, gave not such good advice, but from the perspective of Absalom, but it was much better advice for David, and indeed was able to convince Absalom that his advice was better. And we'll see now what was the effect of that. As we mentioned last week, that what this meant was that Hushai bought time for David to get organized. And we know that David was a brilliant military commander, and he had led Israel to victories before he was king and once he was king. And so and that's exactly what he does here. So chapter 18, verse 1, David mustered the troops who were with him and set over them captains of thousands and captains of hundreds. David sent out the troops, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Joab's brother Abishai, son of Tzeruiah, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And David said to the troops, I myself will march out with you. So first of all, you can see he's taking charge. If we saw him arrive, and by the way, he's in Machanaim, which is on the eastern side of the Jordan River, further north, okay? And we said it was in part of the land of Gilead, so we're in the area of the tribe of Manasseh. And what we're seeing here, number one, is that if they arrive tired and exhausted and depressed, this has given time for David to rally and organize the troops, which is what he's done here. You can see an organized army. And now he says at the end that he insists that he wants to lead them in battle. Now, the troops replied, no, for if some of us flee, the rest will not be concerned about us. Even if half of us should die, the others will not be concerned about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better for you to support us from the town. And the king said to them, I will do whatever you think best. Okay, so here, indeed, the people were very wise, because if we'll see what happens in the other camp, Absalom himself, and this is also something that was part of the decision of Hushai, of the advice of Hushai versus Achitophel. Achitophel had said to Absalom, I will lead the troops. Hushai takes advantage of that and uses this to not just to buy time, but to convince Absalom that he needs to be in charge by flattering him. Oh, you are the leader. You're the absolute leader. You need to lead everyone in battle. And which indeed was stupid, because certainly if we're talking about biblical times, the king has not just absolute authority, but the king is the country. And so if in battle the king is defeated or is killed, that is the end of the battle, but that's how it's perceived. Now, you may recall, well, we didn't study this already, but for those of you who have studied the book of Kings, when Ahab is killed, he is killed in battle, okay? And what happens is he is on this chariot or whatever, and he is shot by the enemy. The enemy is Aram. And first of all, it's very important to him that his men prop him up so that the enemy doesn't notice that he has been shot. And then once that's over and they realize he is shot, the war is over. The end of that is that, and all the people scatter and go home. And that's really what would have happened. So if they would have ended up, and this is what the people are saying to David, if indeed you are killed, and by the way, in those days, wounded is killed, because they didn't have the medicine we have today. So if you were, unless you had a little bit of a graze or a scrape or something, but if you were shot, you were, an arrow pierced you, a sword was driven into you, you weren't going to survive that, okay? So here we have, David wants to lead the troops because he feels it's his responsibility. He feels personally responsible here because Absalom has not started a civil war because there are two factions in the country, and so he's leading one faction, David's leading the other. Absalom's only goal was to dethrone David. And so the civil war is a function of a personal battle between Absalom and David. Not that David started it, David is the one responding. But David, you can see then why David will feel personally responsible to lead the troops, as if he's saying, the problem is me. Absalom has a vendetta against me. He doesn't have a vendetta against you, the army. You're helping me out. But then the people respond to him very wisely. If you go and you're killed, that's the end of the war. Okay, even if half of our army is killed, that doesn't mean it's the end of the war. In the same way that just of the king is killed. So that's really what's going on. And in verse 4, we see that David immediately recognized the wisdom of their words and he acquiesces. So the king stood beside the gate. Which gate? The gate of the city of Machanaim. The king stood beside the gate as all the troops marched out by their hundreds and thousands. So he's standing there, wishing them good luck, thanking them for their service. You can imagine that this is a real, shoot of morale. Come on, let's go, really giving them strength as they go out into battle, reminding them who they're fighting for. The king gave orders to Yoav, Avishai, and Ittai. Again, these are the three generals of the three different groups. Yoav and Avishai are brothers, okay? They're both sons of Tzeruiah, and they're both nephews of David. Tzeruiah is David's sister. Ittai is a Gittite or whatever, and he's probably not an Israelite. Ittai, the Gittite, Gat is a Philistine city, and we know that David totally defeated the Philistines. So the people who lived in those areas who were Philistines are now subject to David. And this may be a mercenary, or it may be somebody, that is loyal to him. But we already saw that, both Ittai and Hushai, they have been tested and they are incredibly loyal to David. This is not just about, being paid money. They may have started out as mercenaries, but they're certainly not that today, which is why David trusts him so much to lead the people in battle. And he says as follows, deal gently with my boy Absalom for my sake. Now the Hebrew is a little odd, okay? It says, Le'at li hana'ar le'Avshalom. Le'at means slowly, carefully, okay? So here that is interpreted as being gently. But if you think about it, is it really so clear what David is saying? Slowly, carefully, gently. What exactly is he saying? And he says, to the boy, okay, the boy, to Absalom. Absalom is a grown man. Absalom has led a rebellion, which he has planned for years. And he has sowed the seeds to build his popularity and to discredit David for quite some time, which culminates, of course, in his ability to lead this massive rebellion and to force David and his immediate court out of Jerusalem. So, and yet for David, he's the boy. He's his son. And we'll see that as we go on in this story, how the fact that Absalom is David's dear son creates tremendous conflict for David and problems for the entire nation. So what does this mean? All the troops heard the king give the order about Absalom to all the officers, okay? And it's very clear, certainly as we read on, but even with this, that David is saying, now they're going to battle, a real battle. You want to kill as many people on the other side so you can defeat them. That's how you do it, okay? And who's the head of the other side? Absalom, who has crowned himself king, effectively, okay? So, like we said before, the risk of David going out would be if David would be killed, that would be the end of the war. In the same vein, if Absalom were to be killed, it would be the end of the war. And we're talking here about a civil war, brother against brother. And it's not even necessarily certain tribes against certain tribes. We saw, for example, with the tribe of Judah, okay, which is David's tribe, which is Absalom's tribe. It's split. We have the people who remain with David, and yet Absalom crowned himself king in Hebron. He led the rebellion from Hebron, which is the center of Judah. And we know that he also took Amasa, which is his cousin, not just from Judah, but from the house of David, from the family of David. He takes him as his general. So it's a very complicated situation. And yet the king, rather than say the most important thing is to kill Absalom because that will end the war, he says quite the opposite. I don't want you to kill Absalom. I want you to be careful with Absalom. The troops marched out into the open to confront the Israelites. Now here it's very interesting. We actually have two different words. The English translation does not effectively reflect this. The actual words in the Hebrew are ha'am, which literally means the people, and Israel. Now, as we're reading, Israel is going to be referring to Absalom's people. The nation is going to be referring to David's people. It's very interesting. Okay, to me, it tells us something. It reminds us of something that happens later on. After Solomon's death, the kingdom splits, and the northern kingdom becomes Israel, and the southern kingdom is Judah. And here we have a similar kind of thing of Israel versus the nation, which is standing with David, as is the case with Rehoboam, who is the son of Solomon, a grandson of David. Many things that we're going to see here in this story, and as we continue the next chapter or two, has echoes of the fact that there is a tension in the nation that we have seen before. Okay, we saw a tension when Saul was chasing David, and David had Judah behind him, which is his tribe, and Saul had everybody else, and his tribe is Benjamin. And after Saul is killed, there's again a civil war between the north, including Benjamin, and Judah in the south. Here, it's not as clear cut. Here, it's just the names. Okay, we're going to see different kinds of people, but later on, under Rehoboam and Jeroboam, we're going to have a similar kind of cut as we did under Saul, with one exception: Benjamin moves into Judah's camp, whereas until now, Benjamin was a linchpin of Israel's camp. Okay, let's see how this plays out. So they go into battle. Where do they go? In the forest of Ephraim, but they are not in Ephraim. This is a forest in Ephraim that's actually in Manasseh. That's actually in the Gilead. Why is it called Ephraim? I don't know. Okay, it could be it goes back to that. There was a civil war after the battle with Jephthah, and we have Ephraimites that are going back and forth over the bridge. So it could be and we know from that point there were Ephraimites who were living in the area of Manasseh, in that area. So it could be a forest that had some Ephraimites living nearby. But that is where the battle takes place. And I had a teacher who pointed out something very interesting. David will never fight a battle where he is. He always will take the battle out beyond the city. If you're in the city, then you risk siege. If you take the battle out of the city, then you have equal playing field, in a sense. And another thing you may recall, when Saul was chasing David, he went to a city called Keilah. And in the end, it was besieged, and he had to leave because of Saul threatening him. So I think he understood firsthand the danger of a siege, as opposed to being out there. And so he takes the battle out there. The Israelite troops were routed by David's followers, and a great slaughter took place there that day, 20,000 men. Okay, so definitely listening to Hushai's advice, Absalom dug his own grave, or the grave of his men, because it gave David the ability to strategize, to regroup, and they had a bloody battle, and the Absalom's followers were slaughtered. The battle spread out over that whole region, and the forest devoured more troops that day than the sword. And again, you have to wonder what was in that forest. Were there wild animals? Were there, lots of places hard to maneuver with rocks and trees that were felled, and maybe people just tripped and fell, and all kinds of things. But it's very interesting when we see that it's David who essentially chooses the battleground, in this forest so that not only the people are killed by the sword of the enemy, but also because they're in this particular forest. Absalom encountered some of David's followers. Absalom was riding on a mule, and as the mule passed under the tangled branches of a great terebinth, his hair got caught in the terebinth. He was held between heaven and earth as the mule under him kept going. So he's hanging there, okay? And we learned before, and I think this is such a beautiful, ironic, whatever image. When we first met Absalom, we talked about him being long hair, and he was very proud of his hair. And there was a level of arrogance about Absalom that was represented by his hair and how he cared about his hair. And here we have his hubris literally hanging him. Okay, as he drives through, his hair is caught in the branches, that long hair. He should have cut it. He should have, it's really, if you're going to be a good soldier, crew cut and maybe put a helmet on or something, not this long hair, but he didn't want to part with his hair because this was literally his crown of glory. And that's what catches him. So he's hanging there, literally hanging by his hair. Joab said, okay, 1 second. One of the men saw it and told Joab, I have just seen Absalom hanging from a terebinth. Now remember, David's order to them, be careful with Absalom. Joab said to the man who told him, you saw it? Why didn't you kill him then and there? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. Okay? So Joab, first of all, is frustrated. He says, why didn't you kill him? Well, why didn't he kill him? He's going to tell you, because David said not to. But what is Joab saying to him? I would pay you to do this. I'll make you a wealthy man. But the man answered Joab, even if I had 1,000 of shekels of silver in my hands, I would not raise a hand against the king's son. For the king charged you and Abishai and Ittai in our hearing, watch over my boy Absalom for my sake. Okay? And he doesn't say here, for my sake. That is something that this boy adds, but he understands what's going on. What is this for my sake? Okay? It's not for the sake of the war. It's not for the sake of the people, because we understood that. Of course, for the sake of the war, the smartest thing is the sooner you can kill, as sooner you can kill the king of the other side or the head of the other side, you're going to win. But he said, no. He said, you have to, for me, look out for me. Okay. If I betrayed myself and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have stood aloof. Okay, now he gets very, very bold and talking to his general, to Joab. And he says, and you know well that the king, nothing gets by the king. He would find out about this. And then he would accuse me of killing his son, and you would not back me. You would just stand by. So you have this simple soldier who understands who he's dealing with. Joab, we always saw Joab is a brilliant strategist. He's a brilliant fighter, but he's had some problems in his personality, which we're going to see as we go on. And so he already reads him and he says, you're an opportunist. You're not going to step in and say, I'm the one who told him to do it. Joab replied, then I will not wait for you. He didn't deny that he wouldn't have given back. And he says, no, I'm not relying on you. He took 3 darts in his hand and drove them into Absalom's chest. Absalom was still alive in the thick growth of the terebinth when 10 of Joab's young arms bearers closed in and struck at Absalom until he died. So first of all, Absalom, if it's not just that they didn't kill him, that David says, don't kill him. It's not just that they didn't obey that, but in the end, he dies a very long death. He's hanging there, but that's not anybody's fault. And then even when Joab stabs him, he's still alive. So it's quite a long, drawn out, bad death. Then Joab sounded the horn, and the troops gave up their pursuit of the Israelites, for Joab held the troops in check. And again, this is exactly what we said. As soon as the leader is dead, you can blow the trumpet and say, we won. The war is over. And we can see what happened. They took Absalom and flung him into a large pit in the forest, and they piled up a very great heap of stones over it. Then all the Israelites fled to their homes. And as soon as the Israelites, again, the Israelites are the Absalom's men, as soon as they see he's dead, and not just dead, he's been thrown into a pit and just some stones put there. He's not given any kind of burial of honor. There is nobody there to take him and give him some kind of honorable burial, even if he was defeated. The killing of Absalom ends everything, and the Israelites just run for fear. Now in verse 18, we have something that's going back. Now here, and it's translated correctly here. This is the verb here is the verb for take is here in past perfect. Until now, it's a regular past. Every verb that we've been telling is telling the story. This is what happened. This is what happened. We get to verse 18. We're now being told about something that happened long earlier, but that it has bearing on the story. And what is that? Now, Absalom in his lifetime had taken the pillar, which is in the valley of the king, and set it up for himself, for he said, I have no son to keep my name alive. He had named the pillar after himself and has been called Absalom's monument to this day. Absalom's monument, the original Hebrew, is Yad Avshalom. Okay, so first of all, for those of you who have been to Israel, I'm not sure what it's called in English. Is it called Absalom's monument or Absalom's tomb or something? In Hebrew, it's called Yad Avshalom. It is this thing. It's near, it's opposite the old city, near the Mount of Olives, and it's like this kind of a shape thing, stone. And it says it's Absalom's memorial, Absalom's tomb. Well, it isn't. That particular building that we have in Israel today dates back to the Second Temple period, okay? And it's not clear who put it up and for what, but it does match the location of where this was. So at some point, centuries later, the name was assigned to it as Absalom's tomb, because I guess centuries later, they assumed this is what it was, but it wasn't, because of course, modern archaeology can date it and can know that it is from a much later time. But clearly they knew that somewhere there had been something like this. Now this presents a bit of a problem, because we know that earlier on, when we first meet Absalom, before things get rough, or very rough, we know that he gets married and he has children. Okay, let's see if I can find it. I know that I had marked it, but you know how it is sometimes. I just forget. Here it is. I found it. Great. Chapter 14. Chapter 14, verse 27. It's kind of like a summary of Absalom before we get into this whole rebellion thing. Absalom had 3 sons and a daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. Okay, and we recalled then he named his daughter after his sister Tamar, who was raped and had that terrible, terrible tragedy. So it's a little bit weird that here it says he didn't have sons and he felt the need to put up some kind of monument to himself in his lifetime. What is this all about? So there's a number of theories. One is that he did put this up at a time where he didn't have sons. He was a young bachelor. He hadn't married yet. But it tells you, if that's the case, it tells you really something about him. Okay, because he's not, how many people when they're young are saying, I need to make sure that I am preserved for posterity, regardless of who my children are or whether I have any children. Okay, it's a time when you haven't yet accomplished anything. When you're looking back on your life and you want to see how you've accomplished, it's usually when you're older, and it's important for you that someone remembers what you've accomplished. And if you have children, grandchildren, you rely on them to carry your legacy. They will teach their children about what you taught them and whatever. But this would have been at a time when he was young and he hadn't done anything yet. So if we talked about Absalom and his hubris, his arrogance, this is another sign that this was part of his personality. So if that is the case, and I think it makes a lot of sense that, he did have children, he had children later, he put it up at a time when he didn't have children, okay? Why then is it mentioned here? It's not mentioned earlier. Why is it relevant here? At the end of the day, Absalom was killed. He was buried he was killed in a horrible way, and he's buried without any tomb, and he's just there, under some rocks in a pit somewhere. But I think, and this is an idea I also heard from a teacher that I studied with, he's basically saying, then that this is like the writer of Samuel, who are the prophets. They're saying something about Absalom. So one thing is about this arrogance, but I think in even a simpler way, they're saying this is a man who thought he would be great and ended up with no end. Now, he may have had children. One theory, by the way, is that he had children, but they didn't survive. They lived whatever, they're not alive here at any point. What we do know is they never show up again. We don't know of any continuation of Absalom. When he is dead, he's gone. There's nothing else. And there's perhaps what this verse comes to tell us is not just about his arrogance, but at the extent that even if he did bear children, effectively he had no children because he had no continuation. His death was just complete and total failure. And the idea of it is called Absalom's monument to this day. And we have something to this day as well, even though it's not the same thing. Absalom became famous for what he did, not famous in a good way, famous in a bad way. Okay, this the man who, because of his arrogance, rebelled against his father, caused great damage, and then was defeated like an animal. Like he's over, he's finished. And it says something about how we remember Absalom. And then we go on. Achimaat, son of Tzadok, who you'll remember was one of the priests who is actually going back and forth between Jerusalem and David's camp and kind of being a spy. He says, let me run and report to the king that the Lord has vindicated him against his enemies. Okay. Now the question is, we don't forget, David is not in the battle. This takes place in the battle, probably in or near that forest of Ephraim. David is back in Machanaim, sitting in the city, waiting to hear what's going on in the battle. And so it's Achimaat, who of course feels very loyal and very close to David, and he wants to go and tell him what happened. And he wants to tell him in a way to express victory. Absalom is dead. We have nothing to worry about. We defeated them. All is good. But Joab said to him, you shall not be the one to bring tidings today. Tidings, you may bring tidings some other day, but you'll not bring any today, for the king's son is dead. He says, this is not a victory announcement because you're talking about the son of the king. Okay? And Joab said to a Cushite here would be a slave, okay? Go tell the king what you have seen. He's sending the lowest of the lowest, just an ordinary person, and he doesn't even tell him what to say. He says, just go describe the situation. The Cushite bowed to Yoav and ran off. But Achimaat, son of Tzadok, again said to Yoav, no matter what, let me run too, behind the Cushite. Yoav asked, why should you run, my boy, when you have no news worth telling? He has news, but no news worth telling in the sense you only are bring tragic news. If you know David, this is going to be tragic for him. And he says, I'm going to run anyway. Then run, he said. So Achimaat ran by way of the plan, and he passed the Cushite. So he overtakes the boy who's running to bring the news. David was sitting between the two gates. The watchman on the roof of the gate walked over to the city wall. He looked up and saw a man running alone. The watchman called down and told the king, and the king said, if he is alone, he has news to report. News to report meaning good news. Okay, whenever we say now news to report, the reference or the assumption is good news. As he was coming nearer, the watchman saw another man running, and he called out to the gatekeeper, there's another man running alone. And the king said, that one too brings news. The watchman said, I can see that the first one runs like Achimaat, son of Tzadok, to which the king replied, he is a good man, and he comes with good news. So now we've created a situation when David sees it's Achimaat, he's assuming he's bringing him good news. And from Achimaat's point of view, he is bringing him good news. Achimaat called out and said to the king, all is well. He bowed low with his face to the ground and said, praise be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king. So he's saying, we won. But then the king asked, is my boy Absalom safe? And at that point, Achimaatz understands that this was not such an easy thing to tell the king. And there was a reason Yoav said, no, 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 not you. And so he says something very odd. He says, and Achimaatz answered, I saw a large crowd when your majesty's servant Yoav was sending your servant off, but I don't know what it was about. He knew darn well what it was about, but he suddenly realized if he's going to now tell the king that Absalom was killed, he's bringing terrible news to the king, and he's so close to him, he doesn't want to do that. The king said, step aside and stand over there. He stepped aside and waited. Just then the Cushite came up, and the Cushite said, let my lord the king be informed that the Lord has vindicated you today against all who rebelled against you. Again, everybody's, we won. And the king asked the Cushite, is my boy Absalom safe? And the Cushite replied, and here recall, this is somebody who doesn't know David. He's not smart. He's just bringing him. He's telling the facts as it is without any understanding of what this message will do to David. What does he say? May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rose against you to do you harm fare like that young man. What is he saying? He was your enemy. He was your chief enemy, and everybody should be killed the way he was. And that was obvious what he meant, at which point the king was shaken. I'm not sure why chapter 19 starts here. It shouldn't, because the next verse is really, the first verse of 19 is a direct continuation of the story. The king was shaken. He went up to the upper chamber of the gateway and wept, moaning those words as he went, my son Absalom, oh my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh Absalom, my son. And here we see this terrible pain, the tragedy that David has experienced, the very Absalom who caused all this terrible situation, both to David personally and to the entire nation, creating civil war. That is over because Absalom was killed. But for David, it's his precious, precious son. And he is heartbroken and he's crying and he's calling out, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. And this connects so closely and so well with the way David had talked about the boy Absalom. Be careful with the boy Absalom, because all along we have a situation here where David is fighting a battle against his son who he loves. Okay, so we'll stop here. We'll take it up next. Well, we will not be meeting for the next 2 weeks. Next week is Christmas. The week after is New Year's. Christmas, we're all, it's so weird this year. Christmas is the first night of Hanukkah. So we're all busy next week, and New Year's is still Hanukkah. And even if you wanted to meet on New Year's, I will be driving back from Eilat just as around the time of this. So we'll just take the next 2 weeks off, and everybody will enjoy a holiday. I want to wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And really, I hope you all have a chance to be with your family and grandchildren and children and whoever else. And we will resume in 3 weeks with chapter 19, verse 2. Okay. Any questions, any comments? Happy to hear. Everyone's so quiet today. Okay. Great.
I just wanted to say,
yes,
I can understand why David told Solomon to get rid of Joab, because he recognized the kind of individual he was.
Well, that is something we're definitely going to take up next week. I mean, we will hopefully get to First Kings at some point, and then we will do that in detail. But definitely, we will take that up. Yes, next week. Very much so. But one thing, let me just see if I didn't pull this out or wait. 16.
I got a comment.
Yes, this is a verse I did not point out where I should have, which is very, very relevant. Verse 16, okay? At the end of the battle, we just read it, but I didn't put this. Then Joab sounded the horn and the troops gave up their pursuit of the Israelites. Oh, I know why. Because it's the English translation is no good. So I just read it, forgetting what I wanted to say about it. In the English, it says, for Joab held the troops in check. That's not what it meant. For Yoel saved save the nation. It keeps translating, my translation keeps translating the nation to troops. Okay. And we talked about Israel being Absalom's side, and the nation is the nation, and that is David's troops. But for some reason, my translation says, instead of saying the nation, it translated as the troops. And it wasn't that he kept them in check, it's because he saved them. Okay. And this is something very, very important. And we'll discuss this. We'll take this up next week. And it's very related to what you were saying, Claudette, that by killing Absalom, he saved the nation. He ended the war. Okay. And that's very much what we have here in verse 16. And that becomes very, very relevant with David's what David's instructions to Solomon as to kill Joab and why. So we're going to take that up. We'll start with that next week, and then we'll go into chapter 19.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sondra, do you have one comment?
Yes. Go ahead, John, and then we'll get to Carol.
Just a comment on verse 4, where you talked about 3 and 4, where
Which verse? Verse 4?
3 and 4, where David holds back on not going out with the troops. In the
Yes.
footnote in my Bible says David suggests he was showing wisdom in being a leader, that he would heed the counsel of his subordinates, because some leaders tend to think they're always right in whatever they think is right.
No, it's very impressive that David agreed with their advice, that he understood that this was, he didn't say it's my way or the highway here. You know?
Yeah.
100%. Carol, did you want to say something?
Just a very small point. It's a question. In my Bible, it says, and the king said unto Cushi, and you said the Cushite. It's a sort of a matter of grammar. What does it say in the Hebrew? Does
The
it
Hebrew
actually
is a Cushi. A Cushi.
Cushi or Cushai? The king said
No,
unto
it's
Cushai.
Cushi, and
Cushi.
Cushi is a Cushite or a Cushite, or however you say it in English.
What's his
Cushi
name?
is a literal. There was a land of Cush, which is identified with Ethiopia. It would have been a black man, and the assumption is it would have been a slave.
But his name wasn't Cushi. In other words,
No. That was who he was. He was an
He was a
Ethiopian.
Cushite.
Whatever. Yeah.
Sorry.
But
Didn't
in
they come
the
in
Bible, when you talk about someone who's from Cush, it's
Yeah.
usually in the context of a slave or a servant, or a low level kind of person who is, look, he's not from Israel. He's from Africa. So what's he doing there? There's an active slave trade going on. And unfortunately, everybody was
wrong.
part of the deal,
Probably someone good at running.
something like that. Absolutely. Absolutely. But he certainly wasn't a slave in the modern sense, because, he was trusted with arms. He was sent off. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was just that, he's subservient to David, because that's where he ends up.
No,
He doesn't have a lot of choice in where he's going, but that's his life.
no, you're wrong.
Anyway, so we will take this up again in 3 weeks. Happy holidays to all of you.